The Bible's greatest mystery revealed: who was Cain's wife? In the silence after the first murder, the earth drank Abel's blood, and Cain fled, terrified, not just of God's judgment, but of others out there. Others. Who were they? If only 4 people existed, why did Cain cry, "Whoever finds me will kill me"? What if the Bible is hinting at something far deeper, something humanity was never meant to forget? This isn't just a story of jealousy and murder. It's a mystery buried in the roots of creation, a secret about Cain's wife, the forgotten children of Adam and Eve, and the fragile line between God's justice and mercy. The greatest mystery: who was Cain's wife? If Adam and Eve were the very first people on earth, then where did Cain find his wife? And why was Cain terrified that anyone who finds me will kill me, if supposedly only 4 people existed at that moment? This question has echoed across centuries, whispered in churches, pondered in homes, and debated in seminaries. Could it be that this ancient mystery holds a key to understanding humanity's earliest days and even the very heart of God's plan? The world was still young then, fresh and raw, its soil still damp with the memory of Eden's perfection. Paradise had been lost, and now Adam and Eve labored outside its gates under a sun that seemed harsher, with thorns and thistles sprouting from cursed ground. Yet even here, life continued. Their firstborn, Cain, grew into a man of the soil. His hands were rough, scarred from years of tilling the stubborn earth, coaxing crops from a world no longer eager to yield its fruit. His younger brother, Abel, tended flocks that grazed under open skies, animals still carrying the faint memory of a time before death had entered creation. Both brothers knew of God. Both understood worship. But when the time came to bring their offerings before the Creator, their hearts were revealed. Abel selected the very best from his flock. He chose the firstborn lambs, fat and flawless, lifting them with trembling hands as smoke rose heavenward. His gift was pure devotion, a surrender of what was most precious. Cain, on the other hand, gathered some of his crops, not the first fruits, not the finest, just some. He piled them carelessly as though the gesture alone might suffice. And God, who sees not just the gift but the heart of the giver, looked with favor upon Abel's offering. But to Cain, he gave no regard. At that moment, the first seeds of bitterness took root in Cain's heart. His face darkened. His fists clenched. The soil he had worked so faithfully now seemed to mock him. But God spoke gently to Cain. "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Cain heard, but pride whispered louder than God's warning. Jealousy bloomed into rage, and rage plotted a dark path. "Let's go out to the field," Cain said to Abel one day. The younger brother followed, unaware of the trap. There, far from their parents' eyes, Cain rose against Abel and struck him down. The ground drank its first human blood. The earth itself seemed to shudder under the weight of such a crime. This was no accident. This was no heated quarrel. This was premeditated murder, the first in human history. Later, when God came calling, Cain deflected. "Am I my brother's keeper?" But the Almighty's voice thundered back. "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Cain was cursed. The soil would no longer yield crops for him. He would become a restless wanderer upon the earth. But then something strange happened. Cain cried out, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." Wait, stop, and listen. Whoever finds me? Who was Cain afraid of? If Adam and Eve were the only humans and Abel was dead, who were these mysterious others Cain feared would take revenge? And why, in response, did God place a protective mark on Cain, declaring, "Whoever kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over"? Was God protecting Cain from imaginary threats? Or does this reveal a truth about early humanity that we have missed all along? Could there have already been others, men and women unknown to us, living beyond the edge of the biblical narrative? Or does the answer lie closer to home, in a verse so brief that most readers overlook it entirely? Genesis 5, 4 whispers of other sons and daughters born to Adam and Eve. Could Cain's wife have been one of these unnamed daughters? And if so, what does this mean for our understanding of the earliest families? This mystery is no simple riddle. It is a doorway into profound questions about human origins, divine design, and the mercy of a God who writes redemption even in the blood-stained soil of our failures. The wrath and the curse, Cain's fear of others. The air felt heavier that day, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. Cain stood before the Almighty, the same hands that once worked the soil now stained with the blood of his brother. His heart pounded in his chest, but not with remorse. Instead, it was a twisted mix of fear, anger, and confusion. The voice of God, once gentle in the garden, now thundered with holy grief. "What have you done? Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." The weight of those words crushed Cain like the stones he once used to till the land. The ground, his companion in labor, had turned against him. And now God's judgment fell upon him like a shadow too heavy to escape. "You are cursed from the ground," said the Lord, "which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the soil, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You shall be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain's lips trembled. The thought of being cut off from the land, from the presence of God, sent a cold fear through his veins. No roots, no home, no future, only wandering. "My punishment is more than I can bear," Cain cried out. "Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." Those words hung in the air like a riddle. Whoever finds me. But who, Cain? The world, as far as the narrative has told us, contained only Adam, Eve, and Cain himself. Abel was gone. If no others existed, whom did Cain fear? Was this guilt twisting his mind? Or was there something and someone beyond the borders of Eden's memory that we are not told? God, in his mysterious wisdom, did not dismiss Cain's fear as foolishness. Instead, he answered it with an act of strange mercy. "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." And the Lord placed a mark upon Cain, a sign known only to God and the heavens to warn any would-be avenger. "Touch not this man." It was a mark that spoke 2 truths at once. To Cain, it was both protection and reminder. He could not return to the life he knew, but he would not die at the hands of others. To humanity, it was a declaration that vengeance belonged to God alone, not to man. But the mystery deepened. Why would God mark Cain to protect him from people who, we assume, did not exist? Could it be that Adam and Eve, in their centuries of life, had other children, sons and daughters unnamed in the early chapters of Genesis? Or were there others, descendants of a plan beyond what our eyes have seen, living on the fringes of this ancient world? Cain turned and walked away, the weight of the curse heavy upon his shoulders. Each step carried him further into the unknown. He had murdered his brother, defied his maker, and yet he was still alive, wandering with a mark no man dared challenge. The land stretched before him, vast and silent. Somewhere out there, people existed. Whether they were brothers, sisters, or strangers, Cain now feared them all. The restless wanderer became a fugitive not only from God, but from the very community that might have claimed him as family. This moment marked a turning point in human history. It was the first time justice and mercy collided on the blood-stained ground. The curse would define Cain's journey, but the mark would preserve his life. But the question lingers like smoke rising from Abel's altar. Who were the others Cain feared? Was this the first clue that the human story is bigger, more complex than we have imagined? And why would God care so deeply for a murderer as to shield him from harm? As Cain faded into the horizon, the ground no longer his friend, and the presence of God no longer near, the mystery only deepened. What awaited him beyond the edge of this cursed land? And what does his fear reveal about the early days of humanity? The answer lies in a hidden truth, a detail in Scripture so small most readers miss it entirely. Could it be that Cain was not as alone as we've always thought? Unveiling the mystery of Cain's wife. The question lingers like a shadow at the edge of Eden. If Adam and Eve were truly the first humans, where did Cain find a wife? Was she a stranger wandering in some forgotten land? Or was there a deeper truth hidden within the folds of Scripture, waiting for eyes willing to see? Genesis whispers the answer softly, almost in passing. After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. These unnamed children, born over centuries, became the silent foundation of humanity's growth. Their names were not recorded in the canonical text, but their existence was essential. Cain, cursed and marked, wandered far from the land of his parents. Yet even in his exile, life did not end for him. He took a wife, and together they bore a son named Enoch. In the ancient text known as the Book of Jubilees, this wife is given a name, Awan. She was Cain's sister, born after the expulsion from Eden, and in her womb carried the seed of a new generation. To modern ears, the idea of Cain marrying his sister sounds strange, even disturbing. But in the dawn of creation, the world was a different place. The bloodlines of Adam and Eve were pure, untouched by the mutations and flaws that centuries of sin and decay would bring. Science, in its own way, affirms this possibility. Modern geneticists speak of genetic bottlenecks and the resilience of small founding populations. In those early days, humanity's gene pool was unspoiled. Marriages between siblings carried none of the dangers they would today. Consider the Amish communities in America. Descended from a small group of founders in the 1700s, they grew into a thriving population of over 300,000. Or the people of Tristan da Cunha, a remote island in the South Atlantic, where 15 settlers created a lasting community despite generations of intermarriage. These modern examples, though not perfect, echo a principle seen in ancient days. Small populations can grow and flourish, even from a handful of individuals. But Adam and Eve's children were different. They began with perfect genetic material, unmarred by time. Their bodies bore no trace of disease, their minds no corruption of generations. It was only after centuries, as humanity strayed further from Eden, that weakness entered the human frame. Cain's marriage to Awan was not scandalous in those first days. It was necessary. Through them, the line of Cain grew, and from his descendants came shepherds, musicians, and craftsmen. Civilization itself began to take shape, even as sin still lingered like a predator in the shadows. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not how Cain found a wife, but how God's plan continued through a man marked by murder. Even in the ashes of Abel's blood, life emerged. Even from a cursed wanderer, families and communities began to form. This story is not merely about ancient history. It is about mercy, survival, and the unstoppable purpose of God. Cain's wife, though unnamed in Genesis, became a bridge between Eden's loss and humanity's unfolding journey. She reminds us that every thread in the tapestry matters, even those hidden from the spotlight of Scripture. What if this forgotten woman carried in her womb not just Cain's son, but the first heartbeat of a world learning to rise again from the dust? The first city and Cain's legacy. The wind carried the scent of dry earth and distant fires as Cain wandered east of Eden, away from the face of God. The mark upon him burned as a reminder of his guilt and a shield against vengeance. He had left behind his family, his brother's blood crying from the ground, and now he walked into an unknown world with only exile as his companion. Yet in the silence of his wandering, something unexpected began to grow. Perhaps it was the memory of what he had destroyed, or perhaps it was the faint echo of God's image still alive within him. Cain, the restless fugitive, became a builder. There in the land of Nod, he began to gather stones and shape them into walls. What started as a place of refuge became something larger. He named it Enoch after his son, as though the name might redeem a life marked by violence. It was here that the first city rose from the dust. Enoch became a place of shelter, of community, and of human ambition. No longer would Cain drift as a lonely wanderer. He planted roots in accursed ground, and in doing so, planted the seeds of civilization. His descendants carried forward this drive to create. Jabal, one of Cain's lineage, became the father of those who dwell in tents and raise livestock. He tamed the fields and taught men to care for herds, bringing order to wild creatures. Jubal, his brother, breathed music into the air. He forged instruments of bronze and wood, and the first melodies danced under the stars. Harps and flutes echoed through the night, giving voice to the human soul in its longing, joy, and sorrow. Then came Tubal-Cain, the craftsman of metal. He shaped tools and weapons from bronze and iron, bending the elements to his will. Through his hands, the earth yielded new power, and humanity took its first steps toward mastery of creation. Here in Cain's lineage, culture began to bloom. Art, music, craftsmanship, and agriculture flourished as men and women worked together, building a world beyond Eden. Yet as they built outward, their hearts drifted inward, away from the Creator. In stark contrast stood the line of Seth. While Cain's descendants filled the earth with noise and innovation, Seth's family lifted their voices in worship. They became keepers of the sacred, guardians of the fragile bond between man and God. It was said that during the days of Enosh, Seth's son, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. They gathered in humble circles, whispering prayers that floated heavenward like fragile smoke. While Cain's line pursued greatness in the world, Seth's line pursued greatness in the spirit. Two paths unfolded before humanity. One sought to build cities of stone, the other sought to build altars of faith. One gathered wealth and knowledge, the other gathered wisdom and worship. Yet both streams were necessary. Cain's line forged the tools that would shape nations. Seth's line carried the covenant that would shape eternity. And so, the story of humanity moved forward, marked by this tension between creation and consecration, between the work of hands and the posture of hearts. Cain, though cursed, left behind a legacy of innovation. Seth, though often overlooked, left behind a legacy of holiness. Together, they set the stage for the great drama of redemption that would one day unfold when the Creator himself stepped into the world they had built. The first city was more than a cluster of stones. It was a symbol of humanity's longing for permanence, even in a world touched by exile. It was a sign that even those marked by sin could shape beauty and order from chaos. But beneath its walls, the earth still remembered Abel's blood. and the heavens still waited for the day when justice and mercy would meet again. Two bloodlines, civilization versus faith. In the dim light of early creation, two rivers flowed side by side, shaping the destiny of all humanity. One river glittered with progress, music, and the sound of hammers striking metal. The other whispered with prayer, reverence, and hearts that longed for the Creator. These were the two bloodlines, Cain's and Seth's, each carrying a vision of what mankind could become. From Cain's descendants came innovation and brilliance. They tamed animals and made the fields yield more than thorns. Jabal became the father of those who lived in tents and tended herds, transforming wild creatures into partners of man. Jubal gave birth to music, the first to coax melodies from strings and pipes. Around the fires of Enoch, the sound of harps and flutes filled the night, weaving joy and sorrow into song. Tubal-Cain worked metal with fire and skill, crafting tools for harvest and weapons for war. Through their hands, the earth gave up its secrets. Cain's line built walls, instruments, and civilizations. They reached for the heavens with ambition and adorned their lives with art and power. Yet, as their cities rose, their hearts sank further from the God who had shaped them from dust. The mark of Cain became not only a warning, but a symbol of a lineage enthralled by creation while neglecting the Creator. Seth's line, in contrast, walked softly on the earth. They were not builders of cities, but builders of altars. From Enosh, Seth's son, came a profound turning point. It was in his days that men began to call upon the name of the Lord. While Cain's descendants filled the air with music and the clang of metal, Seth's children filled it with prayers that rose like incense to heaven. They remembered Eden, not as a place of loss, but as a promise of restoration. From Adam's stories of walking with God in the cool of the day, Seth's line nurtured hope that the Creator's presence could be found again. This hope burned like a fragile flame in a darkening world. Two paths lay before humanity. One pursued mastery of the earth, the other pursued intimacy with its maker. One gave rise to culture and technology, the other to worship and obedience, yet neither path alone could sustain mankind. Civilization without faith becomes hollow and dangerous. Faith without action withers into obscurity. It is no accident that these two streams eventually merged. Through Seth's lineage came Noah, a righteous man in a corrupt age. And through him, the earth would be cleansed and humanity reborn. But even then, echoes of Cain's ingenuity remained, shaping tools, art, and the very ark that would save creation. This is the great paradox of human existence. God had breathed both creativity and conscience into Adam's race. Cain's line embodied humanity's creative brilliance. Seth's line carried its spiritual heartbeat. Together they reflect the dual nature of man, called to cultivate the earth yet never forgetful of the one who formed it. As the generations grew, so too did the tension. Would mankind's hands build monuments to themselves, or would they lift them in surrender to God? This question lingered over the two bloodlines like a storm cloud waiting to break. In this fragile balance lies the story of humanity. Two wings of the same being, one soaring toward achievement, the other yearning for heaven. Only when both are in harmony can mankind truly rise. Climax and redemption. The earth trembled under the weight of sin as generations passed. From the blood of Abel crying out in the soil to the rising towers of Cain's city, humanity stood at a crossroads between ruin and restoration. Yet even in a world marred by rebellion, the Creator's mercy moved like a river, carving new paths through hardened hearts. Cain, marked and cast out, had become a builder. His hands, once stained with his brother's blood, now shaped walls and streets. In the land of Nod, he raised a city and named it Enoch after his son, as if to leave a legacy more lasting than his shame. It was a fragile attempt at redemption, but a step nonetheless. From his line came shepherds and musicians, smiths and craftsmen. Civilization blossomed under their efforts, and yet the ache of separation from God lingered. As flutes sang in the night and metal glowed in furnaces, the heavens remained silent, waiting for hearts to turn back. Here lies the paradox. Cain, the murderer, became the father of invention. His descendants advanced the arts, agriculture, and technology, unknowingly laying foundations for the survival of mankind. And in this strange twist, we see a glimpse of divine grace. God allowed even the fallen to contribute to his plan, weaving their efforts into the greater tapestry of history. Justice had marked Cain with exile, but mercy had marked him with protection. Though he had failed, God did not allow his failure to erase his purpose. This is the mystery of redemption, that even those furthest from Eden could still be part of the story. In Seth's line, worship burned like a steady flame. They called on the name of the Lord, preserving faith while the world around them grew restless. From them would come Noah, a righteous man whose obedience would carry humanity through the waters of judgment. The two rivers, civilization and faith, were never meant to flow apart forever. They were designed to meet, to merge, to bring forth a humanity both creative and consecrated. The story of Cain's wife, whether a Wan as ancient texts suggest or another unnamed daughter of Eve, is not just about origins. It is about hope. It whispers that even from the darkest choices, new life can emerge. Perhaps the greatest truth of Cain's tale is this: the same hands that built a city once shed innocent blood. And yet, by God's mercy, those hands were not doomed to destruction. They became hands that created, shaped, and left a legacy for future generations. If there is redemption for Cain, what does that say about the rest of us? Could it be that the Creator still calls even the most broken among us to rise, rebuild, and leave behind a mark of grace? And what of Cain's wife? Was she truly a Wan, his sister born from Adam and Eve? Or is there a deeper mystery woven into the silence of Scripture? The earth still holds its secrets. The heavens still watch. And the story of Cain lingers as a reminder that even the fallen are not forgotten. What do you think? Was Cain's wife a Wan, as some believe? Or is there more to the story than we've yet uncovered? Cain's wife, as ancient texts suggest, was a Wan, one of Adam and Eve's daughters. Though her name is often forgotten in the biblical account, her role was vital in the unfolding story of humanity. From their union came generations that shaped both culture and history, reminding us that even in a fallen world, God's plan continues through imperfect people. This story reminds us that no matter how far we've strayed, God's mercy is still greater than our failures. It calls us to pause, to reflect, and to remember that His justice is always wrapped in love, and His warnings are invitations to return to Him. Perhaps Cain's story isn't just about the past. It's about us, about how we choose to live today. If this touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Bible Story Secrets, and share in the comments what God's teachings mean to you. And stay with us. In the coming videos, we'll uncover even more hidden mysteries of the Bible, sacred stories, divine secrets, and timeless wisdom that can guide your spiritual life in ways you've never imagined.